Hey, welcome. Efkan here. I'm a psychologist from the Netherlands, and I successfully live with borderline personality disorder. This channel is all about healing and living with BPD. Today's video is the third video in the Schema Therapy for BPD series, and we're going to focus on one of the 5 core emotional needs, which is the need for safety and connection, and how this need, if unmet, causes in total 5 very specific maladaptive schemas. And we're going to do all of this through stories based upon real people. So this video is pretty ambitious because by the end of this video, I want you to no longer see maladaptive schemas as something abstract that you might read in a book or look at a PowerPoint presentation about on YouTube. I want these schemas to be something you can point at and say, that's it. That's me. That's what I do. And oh, this one is like, that's how my friend behaves. So in the sense that you know, by the end of the video, that you know what they are, how they feel, and how to recognize them in yourself and others. So let's get into it. So before we continue, let's really quickly review what schemas are in case you haven't seen part 1. So a schema is basically a lens that is slowly formed over many years, mostly during childhood, based on our temperament and our experiences. So thanks to these lenses, we can give meaning to the things around us and interpret things. For example, we know what a car is thanks to a schema. But schemas don't just help us recognize objects. We also have schemas about love, trust, and things like self-worth. So next to thoughts and beliefs, schemas also have memories, emotions, and bodily sensations tied to them. So it's very important to not see schemas just as a conceptual, logical things. Okay, that being said, so which maladaptive schemas are formed when the universal human need for safety and connection is not met? From the 18 maladaptive schemas in total, there are 5 that are directly linked to this need. So please, just take a few seconds, pause the video, and let these schemas sink in. So unfortunately, so people with BPD, usually have a minimum of 3 out of these, and often all of them. So let's start with the first one, the abandonment instability schema. What is it exactly? So we formed this schema when the care we experienced in childhood was unstable and unpredictable. So this means either our caregivers were there for us only sometimes or abandoned us altogether. So later in life, this schema makes us feel afraid to be abandoned or that people will be unpredictable. Now, to deal with the issues that this schema causes us, or any other maladaptive schema for that matter, we use 3 ways of coping, which are to freeze, run, or fight. In schema therapy, freeze is called surrender, to run is called avoidance, and to fight is called overcompensate. And we share these 3 ways of coping with other animals, in that we only use them when we are really overwhelmed, like when we're in a mini crisis, let's say. But the thing is this, these coping mechanisms are meant for surviving in nature, not for solving problems in daily life, because our ancestors, while still living in the wild, had to be really quick on their feet. And decisions could literally mean the difference between life and death. So to be really nuanced and accurate in our assessment of a situation didn't matter that much. We just had to quickly see if there was danger, and then we either had to run or fight. And if we couldn't, we just froze. So in daily life, when we still use these outdated coping styles that we have inherited from our ancestors, it makes us get stuck in all sorts of ways. For example, then it becomes impossible to constructively satisfy our needs or to gather evidence that a maladaptive schema is not true. So let's make this come alive with examples. And let's start with abandonment instability schema. and how the 3 coping styles for this schema would look like in daily life. So imagine this. Patrick has the abandonment instability schema, and his favorite coping style is surrender. Of course, this is all happening unconsciously, but the surrender to this schema would mean that this schema is true. And now Patrick has to somehow deal with the reality that he has this need for safety and connection, everybody else, but thinks and feels that people are unreliable and will abandon him anyway. So this makes him more accepting of people who are this way and even attracted to them. Because we tend to feel a lot of chemistry with people who correspond well with our schemas. We also have this compulsion to not only see the world through the schemas, but we also love to repeat them. Their pull on us is almost like a drug. So in Patrick's case, he's open to dating Mary, who happens to be exactly like that. She is unreliable. Not only is she not there for him emotionally, she also cheats on him. And every time she does, Patrick becomes more and more afraid that she will leave. And he desperately wants to do whatever it takes so she will stay, even accept her unfaithfulness. Yes, they do fight, he does argue with her, but often he also looks the other way as it eats him inside. And in Patrick's case, he was always like this. He always felt a strong chemistry with people who either abandoned him eventually or stuck around in his life but were very on and off with him. Now let's look at Lisa. Lisa also has the abandonment instability schema, but her favorite coping style is avoidance. So instead of surrendering to the schema like Patrick did, Lisa avoids it altogether. She also thinks and feels that people are unreliable and will abandon her anyway. But instead of accepting that and still trying to get her needs met, she decides to not even try, as not to deal with the pain of abandonment. So Lisa avoids intimate relationships altogether. She doesn't date, she doesn't let anyone get even close. And when she's alone, which is most of the time, she numbs herself. She drinks, she distracts herself, anything not to feel lonely. Because the moment there's even a hint of closeness with someone, she becomes hyper vigilant about everything. If a plan changes, if a reply takes longer, maybe if somebody's less available, she panics. Because for Lisa, even temporary separations can feel like the start of losing someone. So she emotionally detaches before it can even begin. Because she expects them to leave anyway, to disappear, behave unpredictably, or replace her with someone better. And if she ever does start to care about someone, certain thoughts can dominate everything. What if I let myself attach and then they're gone? What if they die? So she decides it's easier to never get attached in the first place. And this might feel like it works for a while, because just because she avoids it, the need for safety and connection doesn't just go away. So over time, Lisa becomes more and more isolated, more and more lonely, and she drinks more and more to cope, because she rather deals with the pain of being alone than with the pain of being abandoned. Now let's look at Susan. Susan also has the abandonment instability schema, but her favorite coping style is overcompensation. So instead of surrendering to the schema like Patrick or avoiding it altogether like Lisa, Susan fights against it. Just like them, she also thinks and feels that people are unreliable and will abandon her anyway. Now Susan is in a relationship with Thomas, and Thomas is actually a good partner. He is stable, committed, and loves her. But he has a top position as a manager, so once or twice a week he comes home late, and once a month he has to travel for a few days. Now, for most people, this will be understandable. But for Susan, every time Thomas is late, her schema gets activated. She starts to feel panic, that fear that he's not coming back, or that he's with someone else. So she calls him, sometimes 5, 6 times in a row. She checks his location. She goes through his messages. And when he finally comes home, instead of feeling relieved, she's angry and starts questioning him. Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you pick up? And when Thomas has to travel for work, it gets even worse. She might demand that he calls her for every few hours. Or she threatens to leave him if he goes. And over time, Thomas starts to feel suffocated. And the painful irony is that Susan's way of trying to keep him close is exactly what pushes him away. And if Thomas eventually does leave, it confirms everything the schema told her all along. That people will always leave, that they're unreliable. Thus, reinforcing her schema to do the same thing again to the next partner. This brings us to the schema mistrust and abuse, which is the second maladaptive schema that can be formed when our need for safety in connection isn't met. Here, the focus is on abuse, which in turn makes us mistrustful. By abuse, think about being cheated, manipulated, or lied to, or hurt physically or emotionally. Usually, we develop this schema when we get traumatized by people who are supposed to take care of us. And in this category, you can also think about things like physical violence and sexual assault. I just want to say this, okay? In case of abuse, if this is you, my heart really goes out to you, and I really know what that's like to be betrayed by the same people who are supposed to love and protect us. This is one of the hardest schemas to heal, unfortunately, and I just want you to know that you're not alone. A lot of people understand what you've gone through, and the good news is that a lot of us came out on the other side. So please, healing is possible. Don't give up. Keep going, and we can heal together, all of us. Okay, so let's see how the 3 coping styles would look for this schema. Again, let's start with surrender. So imagine this. Sarah has the mistrust abuse schema, and her favorite coping style is surrender. This means she's convinced that people will eventually hurt, betray, or humiliate her. Now, Sarah is in a relationship with Mark, and Mark is controlling and physically and emotionally abusive. He often insults her and puts his hands on her. And when she tries to speak up, he threatens her or twists the situation to make it seem like everything is her fault. But Sarah stays, not because she's happy, but because this is what she knows. She feels strangely attracted to Mark in a way that she thinks it doesn't even make sense. Sarah doesn't realize that she grew up around people who treated her this way. So to her, this is just what love looks like. She minimizes it, she tells herself it's not that bad, she adapts her behavior, walks on eggshells, and does everything she can do not to make it worse. And when people around her tell her that this is not okay, she defends Mark. Because if she admits that this is abuse, then she also has to admit that she has been accepting abuse her whole life, and that maybe Mark doesn't actually love her. And that's a truth that feels too painful to face. So Sarah stays, and the cycle continues. But at least Sarah, in this way, thinks that she can meet her need for safety and connection, and that abuse is just part of what you have to take to have somebody in your life who loves you. Now let's look at James. James also has the mistrust abuse schema, but his favorite coping style is avoidance. So instead of surrendering to the schema like Sarah, James avoids it altogether. Now, James does have people in his life. He has friends, he has colleagues, he might even date sometimes. But he never lets his guard down. He's always setting up little tests, gathering evidence to see if people around him won't hurt him. He rarely shares anything personal because in his mind, if somebody knows too much about him, they can use it to take advantage of him. So he keeps his secrets, he hides his feelings, and he avoids being vulnerable at all costs. And the moment someone tries to get closer, he pulls back and gets suspicious. Then he's like, Why do they want to know this? What do they really want from me? Because for James, closeness doesn't feel safe. It feels more like an opportunity for someone to hurt, cheat, or manipulate him. So over time, James lives behind a wall. He has people around him, but nobody really knows him. Now let's look at Nicole. Nicole also has the mistrust abuse schema, but her favorite coping style is overcompensation. She refuses to ever be in a position where someone can hurt her. Her mentality is, if the world is cruel, then I'm going to be the one in control. So Nicole doesn't wait to find out if somebody is trustworthy. She assumes they're not, and she acts accordingly. She reads people, picks them apart, and makes sure she always has the upper hand. When something feels even slightly off, she does not wait. She confronts, she accuses, she becomes cold, harsh, or intimidating. Sometimes she even flips it entirely. She treats people as if they are already guilty, so she has a justification to use them first. She might cheat, exploit, or humiliate, because in her mind, it is safer to strike first than to sit around and wait to be abused. On the surface, Nicole comes across as confident and self-assured, someone you don't want to mess with. But underneath all of that, she's terrified of being taken advantage of again. And the price of all this is that closeness with Nicole always turns into a power game. The more she fights for control, the more people around her feel unsafe. So they leave. And every time they do, it's like proof that she was right all along. That people will always betray you if you give them the chance. And the sad truth is, Nicole has never experienced what it feels like to just be close to someone without it being a competition. Because every time she had the chance, she turned it into one. This brings us to the third schema, emotional deprivation. This one is about having lacked affection, care, warmth, and empathy in our childhood. Also, a lack of protection, so the absence of someone with strength and wisdom to guide and protect us. Typically, the schema gets developed if our caregivers were cold and distant. Okay, so let's look at this one with practical examples as well. So let's imagine Emma. Now, Emma is in a relationship with Daniel, and Daniel is emotionally distant. He never asks her how she feels. He never notices when she's struggling. And when she needs comfort, he's just not there. But Emma never says anything. She never asks for what she needs, because deep down, she believes it wouldn't matter anyway. She was drawn to him precisely because his cold and distant energy felt really attractive to her. Like as if Daniel is someone who's really strong and good at taking care of himself. But the truth is, she grew up with people who were cold and emotionally unavailable. So to her, this is what a relationship should feel like. And here's what makes this schema so tricky. Before Daniel, Emma actually dated someone who was warm and affectionate. Someone who genuinely cared and showed it. But instead of feeling loved, she felt suffocated. Normal expressions of warmth and tenderness felt like too much. So she ended it and went right back to what felt familiar. So now that she's with Daniel, Emma gives and gives, but never gets anything back in return. And over time, she feels horrible and dissatisfied, but she can't really explain why. She doesn't complain, she doesn't ask, but in her mind, needing empathy and warmth is the same as being a burden. Every person she's ever been with was emotionally unavailable in some way. She doesn't really understand how she can love Daniel so much and still be so dissatisfied. She doesn't realize that her schema makes people like Daniel feel like home. This brings us to the coping style of avoidance for the emotional deprivation schema. For this one, we won't do a big practical example. because it looks very similar to what we saw with Lisa in the Abandonment Instability schema. Because in both cases, the person mostly avoids relationships, but for different reasons. With abandonment avoidance, the person avoids relationships because they're afraid of losing someone. They believe that people are unreliable and will eventually leave, disappear, or be taken away from them. So they think, why attach at all if I'm going to lose them anyway? With emotional deprivation avoidance, the fear is not about losing someone. It is about the fact that even when someone is there, they will never truly give you what you need emotionally. So the person stays, but the warmth is just never there. So they think, why bother? Even if they stay, I will feel lonely anyway. So even though the reasoning behind it is different, the behavior will be the same, in the sense that the person will rather be alone and not get involved in relationships. Or if they do get involved with someone, whether that's a friendship or a romantic partner, they are not really open to any level of real intimacy and will keep that door closed. Now let's look at Alex. Alex also has the emotional deprivation schema, but his favorite coping style is overcompensation. So where Emma surrendered to the schema and never asked for what she needed, Alex does the opposite. He asks for everything. Alex is in a relationship with Rachel, and Rachel genuinely cares about him. But for Alex, whatever she gives is never quite enough. If she listens to him talk about his day, but doesn't ask follow-up questions, he feels like she doesn't really care. If she comforts him, but doesn't say exact the right thing, he feels misunderstood. If she needs a quiet evening for herself, he takes it as proof that his feelings don't matter to her. And he tells her every single time. He's not quiet about it like Emma would be. He lets her know exactly what she's doing wrong and exactly what he needs from her. And on paper, wanting to be heard and cared for is healthy, but Alex takes it further than that. His expectations are so high and so constant that no real person could ever keep up. He wants Rachel to always know what he feels, always respond the right way, always be emotionally available. And when she can't, which is inevitable, he feels deprived all over again. The same lack of warmth he felt as a child comes flooding back. And instead of recognizing that his demands are unrealistic, he blames her for not caring enough. Okay, this brings us to the fourth maladaptive schema, and it's called the Defectiveness shame schema. This one is about feeling inferior and unlovable, that we are at our core unworthy, someone who's much worse than others. So with this schema, we can feel a lot of shame because that emotion then helps us to conceal ourselves so others can find out how inferior and unlovable we think we are. So for example, think about finding ourselves unattractive, not intelligent, socially awkward, or being ashamed of our internal world because we think that we are too selfish or too aggressive, or that we have unacceptable sexual desires, etc., etc. Okay, so now let's look at some practical examples again. So imagine this. Ryan has a defectiveness schema and his favorite coping style is surrender. This means he's convinced that he's fundamentally flawed, that something about him is just not good enough. He has accepted that as a fact about himself. Now Ryan has a group of friends, but these are not the kind of friends who would lift him up. They're critical, judgmental, and often make fun of him. They comment on his appearance, his choices, his mistakes, and when they do, Ryan just takes it.
He doesn't defend himself because deep down, he thinks they're right. It doesn't stop there. Ryan does it to himself too. He constantly puts himself down. If something goes wrong, it's his fault. If someone doesn't like him, it makes sense because why would they? If he achieves something good, it was probably luck. And in his relationship, it's the same pattern. His partner is cold and critical, constantly pointing out what he's doing wrong. But Ryan doesn't leave because he believes this is what he deserves. Someone better wouldn't want him anyway. And the painful part is, Ryan doesn't even see this as a problem. He thinks he's just being realistic about who he is. He doesn't realize that he has carefully chosen the people around him to confirm what he already believes about himself. Now let's imagine Ben. Ben also has the defectiveness shame schema, but his favorite coping style is avoidance. Ben has a wife, he has friends, but there are parts of him he would never share with any of them. Thoughts he has that he considers disgusting, desires he's ashamed of, things he did in the past that he can't forgive himself for. And he's convinced that if anyone found out, they wouldn't just be disappointed, they will be repulsed. So Ben keeps all of that locked away. He shows people the version of himself that he thinks is acceptable. And when conversations go somewhere that gets too close to who he really is underneath, he shuts it down. Maybe he laughs it off. Maybe he says something like, yeah, I don't really think about that stuff. Or he just goes quiet until the moment passes. Anything to steer away. Because deep down, Ben is afraid others won't love or appreciate him if they ever find out who he really is. And the part he doesn't want to face is that this is something he has known all along. He has looked at himself and decided that what is there is not worth loving, that he's less than the people around him, and he has already rejected himself because of it. So why would others accept him? Okay, now let's illustrate overcompensation with the example of Max. Max is a stockbroker, and on the surface, he's confident, sharp, and successful. He walks into a room like he owns it. But underneath all of that, Max is running from the same shame that Ryan and Ben carry. He just runs in the opposite direction. Max is very critical of others. He points out their mistakes, their weaknesses, their failures, but he rarely, if ever, acknowledges any of his own. He surrounds himself with people who admire him, and he chose a wife who's gentle, quiet, and self-sacrificing, someone who would never challenge him. But over the years, Max became more and more critical of her too. When she finally told him she was thinking about leaving, Max said the problem was her, because Max cannot allow himself to be wrong. Being wrong means being flawed, and being flawed means being that same worthless kid his parents made him feel he was. So he spends his whole life making sure that kid never shows up. He chases prestige, status, perfection, and he criticizes others before they can ever criticize him. But the cost is that Max has never let anyone truly know him, because the version of himself that people see is not really who he is. It is a performance, and the moment that performance cracks, everything he has been running from comes flooding back. And when it does, he feels like that kid again, worthless, exposed, and completely alone. All the success, all the status, all the praise, none of it matters anymore, because the one thing he was trying to outrun was always there underneath.
Okay, so this brings us to the last schema, and that is the social isolation alienation schema. This one is about feeling different from other people, not feeling like we fit into any group or a community. Now, the schema is a bit different from the others because with the other schemas, they usually form earlier in childhood, mostly through our relationship with our caregivers and family. But this one often develops a little bit later, like starting at early adolescence all the way through early adulthood. So when we start to go to school, join groups, and interact more with the world outside our own family. So it is less about what happened at home and more about what happened out there. For example, maybe our family was different from the people around us. Maybe we're bullied or excluded by other kids. We talk different, look different, or we had, interests that didn't match with anyone else. And over time, that feeling of not belonging became a belief. That there's no group or community where we are truly welcome. So let's illustrate this again.
Let's talk about Laura. Laura has the social isolation alienation schema, and her favorite coping style is surrender. Now, Laura has a job at a marketing agency, and her colleagues are actually nice. They invite her to lunch, they include her in conversations, they ask her to join after work for drinks, and Laura goes, she shows up. But she never fully joins in. She sits at the table, she listens, she nods along. But while everyone else is laughing and talking, Laura is in her head. She's not thinking about what she has in common with these people. She's focused on all the ways she's different from them. They all seem so natural with each other. They know what to say, when to laugh, how to just be. And Laura is sitting there thinking, I am not one of them. In meetings, she doesn't speak up, she doesn't pitch ideas, not because she doesn't have good ideas, but because she already decided that they wouldn't value them anyway, because she's not part of the group. And the sad part really is, nobody's actually rejecting Laura. The door is open, but she has decided for everybody else that she doesn't belong. Now let's look at Nora to illustrate how the social isolation alienation schema looks like in daily life when somebody uses the avoidance coping style. Nora works from home as a freelance translator. She chose a career where she doesn't need to be part of a team. No meetings, no office, no colleagues. Just her and her laptop. And outside of work, it is the same. She used to have a few people she would see now and then, but over the years, those became less and less. Now, her days off look the same every time. She goes for a walk, she grabs a coffee, she sits somewhere alone. And she tells herself she likes it that way. But Nora didn't start out like this. When she was younger, she did try to be part of things. She joined groups, she went to gatherings, but every time she felt like she was from a different world. Like everyone else just naturally knew how to connect. And she was missing whatever that thing is. So eventually, she just stopped trying. She built a life where she doesn't have to. And Nora tells herself she's at peace with this. This is just who she is. But every now and then, the loneliness hits her out of nowhere. And in those moments, she's not so sure anymore. But she tries to fight that feeling off because she prefers being on her own instead of walking into a room full of people, finding out that there is no place for her there. Now let's turn to how overcompensation would look like if someone has the social isolation alienation schema. Let's look at Vivian's example. So Vivian refuses to accept she doesn't belong. So she's going to make it work no matter what it takes. Vivian is actually someone who loves to paint, who reads philosophy books for fun. She would honestly be happiest spending time with friends at an art gallery. But none of that ever made her feel like she belonged anywhere. Growing up, she was always the odd one out, the quiet one, the weird one. So at some point, Vivian decided to become someone else. She got adopted by a group of girls who are loud, social, always out, always seen. And Vivian learned to play the part. She dressed like them, she talks like them, she goes out with them every weekend. She takes the selfies, she laughs at the jokes, and if you saw her, you would think she's one of them, but she's not. Every night out, Vivian is performing, trying to make sure she doesn't say the wrong thing, doesn't seem too quiet, doesn't seem too different. Because the moment she lets herself slip through, she is terrified they will see what she already knows, that she's not like them. And the thing is, it works. She has a social life, she has people around her. But Vivian has never once felt like she actually belongs. But the person they accept is not her. It's a character she built to survive. And on the nights she comes home and finally takes off the mask, she sits alone and wonders how long she can keep this up. Because fitting in was supposed to make her feel less alone, but somehow she has never felt more alone than this. Now, I also want to mention that overcompensation for this schema doesn't always look like this. Sometimes it goes the other way. Instead of trying to fit in, some people reject everyone instead and form their own group of outsiders, a group that looks down on everyone else as shallow or boring or basic. But underneath, it is the same thing, the same belief that they're different, just a different way of fighting it.
Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. In part 4 of the Schema Therapy for BPD series, we're going to do the same thing, but for the need for autonomy, competence, and sense of identity, and how this need is connected to 4 specific maladaptive schemas instead of 5. I would highly recommend watching also the first 2 videos in this series. There's a playlist on this channel, and in the playlist, the videos are also arranged in order. So see you in part 4.